my friends, it's Joey. Welcome to my office. On this channel, we talk about working, productivity, and living as a healthy, happy artist. Today is the first video in our business series, and I thought I would start off by talking about 4Cats Art Studio, a business I founded 18 years ago. It does feel a little self-indulgent, but since starting this YouTube channel, I have got a lot of messages and people asking questions about how 4Cats started, about business advice, and about growing their business. As a precursor to this, I'm an artist who runs a business. I'm not running the biggest business in the world. My passions are art and business. It's not a short story, so I'm going to do this over a series of videos. If business is not your thing and you're looking for art tutorials or decorating advice, please feel free to skip this one. We will be posting our art tutorials regularly on Monday and our decorating series on Sunday. So if you want to come back then, we'll see you then. If you are interested in business, like I said, it's kind of a long story, so maybe grab yourself a cup of tea and I will begin. I have loved art and creating things since I can remember. When I was around 30, we created 4Cats Arts Academy, which is now called 4Cats Art Studio. And now, 18 years later, we have never had so much stuff going on. I started 4Cats in 2003 with my husband. In 1998, my son Jet was born. He was born at 26 weeks and weighed 2 pounds, 2 ounces, so he was about this big. And in case you don't know, a regular pregnancy is 40 weeks, so we were extremely surprised when he came that early. And there was no known reason about why he came that early. We like to say we called him Jet because he was in a big hurry. 4Cats was made for Jet and was one of the first art studios made for every child, not just ones that showed artistic brilliance at an early age. We welcome all that have a love of art, a love of fun, a love of learning, and that's pretty much every child. And some kids even like to come to the classes just because they love to hear the artist stories. I wanted to give kids a chance to use professional art materials, enjoy a love of learning, rather than just assembling crafts. Today we've grown throughout Canada, and embedded in our culture is the ability to adapt quickly. The ability to pivot, which I know is a buzzword right now, and probably every business owner is tired of pivoting. Because of the current challenges that business, including ours, are facing, I decided to start documenting the changes and the growth and how we are getting through this process. Through my personal brand, Joey Alice, I decided to start documenting our growth and our changes, how I do business, how the business climate is changing for everyone, and what we are doing to get through all this. My story and my business experience might be helpful for other business owners dealing with the need to change or the desire to grow quickly. I think the best place to start in a business series for me is with 4Cats because that's where I started and that's where 4Cats started. I am a middle child and I'm quite short too. My brother is 6'6" and my sister is quite tall as well. So as a child, I was very serious and very competitive and would quickly rise to a challenge and also may have been slightly bossy. When we played, I always wanted to be the fastest and the first. I wasn't always, but that's what I wanted. I'm sure my siblings did not appreciate these qualities all the time because basically I was a little Napoleon with middle child syndrome. When I started the business, it seems like so long ago and the world has come so far since then. I personally didn't know one woman who started a business. I knew Oprah Winfrey and I knew Martha Stewart. Seriously, there were no other business role models in my life. I only saw rich, older, white men who ran businesses, and for me, that was not relatable. Of course, we all fell in love with Oprah. Oprah was so inspirational and good. She had her own TV show, her own production company, her own magazine, and eventually even owned her own channel. And I knew I was not as good or as inspirational as Oprah. I related more to Martha Stewart. Not to say that I'm Martha Stewart, but as a child growing up, that's what I would relate to more. She started her business in her 30s. She loved decorating and the home. I studied Martha. I read every book about Martha, every article about Martha. When Sybil Shepherd's movie came out about the Martha story, I watched it about 1,000 times. Martha wanted to run an empire. As someone who was already competitive and ambitious, this sounded very appealing to me. Except, of course, the going to jail part. I also loved Andy Warhol's factory. I read the Warhol diaries. I watched every film about him that I could. I loved the factory. I loved the idea of making art with interesting people and just basically spending your days doing art. My first company was actually in university where I helped people with their essay writing. Next, I made a decorating show with my sister. It was a TV show and it was called Space Girls. It was really fun and we got to shop the idea around. I learned how to cold call. I learned how to tell a story, and we ended up getting the attention of a really, really lovely woman-led production company in Toronto who did the Designer Guys series, but we didn't end up getting funding. Next, my sister and I started a nail salon in Victoria, BC, and as you could see, this was very out of character for me. If you know me, you would be very surprised by this fact. We opened it because we noticed in Toronto there was a lot of nail salons that were quite cheap compared to BC, where it was really expensive to get your nails done. We opened up and closed within 6 months. The main issue, we couldn't do nails. So if staff called in sick, we were stuck. But in general, it was not a great business model and we were not a great fit for it. It was worth it though, because there were many, many, many lessons that I learned. The most important one was whatever I did decide to do, I wanted to be passionate about. Next was 4Cats, and that seemed like a perfect fit. It was all my favorite things: working with kids, creating art, and working with my husband, Daryl. By this time, we had Jet, who was around 5 years old, and twins, Tex and Cash, who are around 2. So why 4Cats? Why teaching? So hours before Jet was born, the doctors pulled me aside and told me that there was a very high likelihood that Jet would have physical problems, but also learning difficulties. He spent the first 2.5 months in hospital, and it was a touch and go situation. During this time, I wanted to look at how I could potentially help Jet, and I looked at a whole bunch of teaching methods for children. I looked at Waldorf, Reggio, and Montessori. My friend was a Montessori teacher, and that's the way of teaching that spoke to me the most. So after Jet was out of the hospital and everything started to settle down, I decided that I would take the Montessori course part-time in the evenings. My intention at that time was not to be a teacher. What I wanted to do was just take the course for Jet so I could help him as much as I could. I was still interested in business and going that route. So anyway, I set up my whole house as a Montessori classroom for Jet. We saved up and bought all of the Montessori materials we could. We enrolled Jet in about 1 million extracurricular activities. Basically, whatever he showed interest in. We'd even gotten him a Japanese tutor. I should say that at that time, when you homeschooled your kids, you also got a certain sum of money that you could put towards classes. Whatever he wanted to learn, whatever he was interested in, whatever he showed a love of learning in is what we did. Today, you would probably call it unschooling. As artists, Daryl and I started talking to Jet about famous artists and artwork, and he really loved the stories in the information. I would, of course, tell him on the level of a child. I wouldn't just read art history books to him. And after we started talking about the artists, he would tell other people what he had learned, which was so great for his confidence. By 4, he could name the group of 7 and tell you about their art and their stories. He could read, he loved Marc Chagall, and he really knew a lot about a lot of artists. Other parents would say that Jet was a little genius, but I knew he was, I knew that he worked on these things. I knew that this was the capability of every child. If they can remember Dora the Explorer, they could remember Pablo Picasso. There's no difference in the learning if you presented it right. So other homeschoolers were interested in what we were doing. They knew that Jet knew all this information and how much he loved art. And so I started to do little art classes for the homeschoolers. So I set up a studio in my friend's basement in Fairfield, Victoria. and there was a big koi pond outside. She had a big backyard. It was like Monet's garden. It was perfect. Years earlier, Daryl had given me a book called Picasso and the Four Cats. He gave it to me from one of my birthdays. And the Four Cats Cafe in Barcelona sound amazing. A place where artists, poets, and writers would get together and talk about art and make art and have gallery shows. And so we called our business Four Cats Art Studio. Well, at the time, Four Cats Arts Academy, which became Four Cats Art Studio. And so my first class was a disaster. There were 7 kids plus Jet. It was very chaotic and not at all what I imagined. One child was under the table, another child was throwing the pastels, but luckily the rest of the kids just seemed to be happily working on their art and didn't seem to notice. As a new teacher, I had never really taught on my own. I had done my curriculum, but there were always other teachers in the room. And I didn't know how to deal with this. And to make it even more stressful, all the parents sat at the back of the room and watched. Somehow I was able to smile my way through it, and at the end the parents said they loved it and they were happy they signed up, which was great. But I was definitely thinking, this is not for me. But I had taken registration money for the month. And so whether I liked it or not, I needed to do this 3 more times. Ugh. So I came up with a plan. I moved that more challenging child into a class with my niece Samantha, my nephew Brandon, and Jet, so I made their own little class, and that way I could give him more attention. And then the other class I just ran the same as before, with Jet again. It worked, and phew, both classes went much smoother. From there, we grew really quickly, and I wanted to get a retail space. I asked my dad if he would loan us $800 just in case we weren't able to pay the rent at the end of the month at a new retail space in neighboring Studio Oak Bay. And luckily, we never had to take that loan, and the business started to grow even more. Daryl built everything, I decorated, we basically did everything ourselves, and that way we were able to save a lot of money. Within 3 months, we opened another studio in another community called Langford. We hired our first employee, who was my friend Kim, who was also our occasional babysitter. 3 months later, we opened in Nanaimo, which is about 2 hours away from Victoria. And what we would do is I would go there every Friday. We'd pack up the whole family in the car and drive up there, and I would teach for the day. I'd teach about 80 students and started developing and building a business up there. We hired more staff. We opened 2 more studios in Victoria, and then we opened one in Comox Courtenay area. Basically, we had grown as much as we could in Vancouver Island, and I had mostly hired friends and family, and things were going pretty well. There were problems, but I didn't know enough about business to recognize that they were problems and that I should have been dealing with them. What I really wanted to do now was to open in Vancouver. So in the next video, we'll talk about how we grew from there. We'll talk about the challenges and difficulties that we faced, and we can talk about how we were able to manage businesses in cities that we didn't actually live in. Thanks very much. I hope this story is interesting, and I hope it's helpful for some people who are starting a business or looking to hear the story and potentially grow their businesses. I'll be doing these business talks every Thursday, so if you'd like to listen in, I would love for that to happen. Please remember to subscribe to this channel if you're interested in business as an artist, if you're interested in art tutorials, or if you're interested in living a creative life and decorating. Thanks again, everyone. I hope you found this interesting and helpful, and I will see you next Thursday for our next business video. Bye.